Hello, everybody. My name is Cesar Reyes, also pronounced Cesar Reyes, and this is CRB Nexus Connect, a California State Library series. I got to sit down with Jeanice Warden. She serves as the chief consultant to the Assembly Committee on Higher Education. She has worked on statewide higher education policy issues for the past several years, served as a legislative director to former Assembly member Wilmer Amina Carter, a legislative representative to former State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Turlickson, and the California Department of Education, as well as principal consultant to the Assembly Committee on Higher Education. She is a graduate from Oakwood University and HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama, and holds a master's degree from the California State University, Sacramento. Thank you so much, Jeanice, for joining me today. I really appreciate you being willing to have this conversation with me. We're going to start with actually just the first question. I'm curious to know, in your current role at the California State Legislature, could you give me like a rundown of kind of some of your duties and like what you find most exciting or challenging about your current role?
Thank you for the question. It's an honor to be here and participate. I appreciate the work that CRB consistently and continuously provides. So thank you for that. And, my current role serving as chief consultant for the Assembly Committee on Higher Education is not shy of consistently evolving, if you will. And I say that because there's some days where I will know that I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and that I can accomplish that. But on any given day, A, B, and C might then come into place, but I still have to also do X, Y, and Z. And so it's interesting because one of the rules that I have is that I have to be able to be flexible, be adaptable, and know that as demands come up, how to prioritize those demands, even though all would arguably be important. But as chief consultant, I have many responsibilities, several being that in part of the time when we're in our busy legislative season, bills are introduced, bills are then referred. When they're referred to this committee, as chief consultant, I have primary responsibility of reviewing all of the bills that are referred to the committee, and then assigning them out to the wonderful team here in higher ed land to then be the other consultants who would analyze bills, as well as I'm analyzing bills myself. And so that takes a good chunk of time, really being able to make sure I'm organized in that, because this committee does have a high volume of bills. Also, just making sure that the needs are met of requests that come in from any member of the legislature, assembly, or Senate. Obviously, first and foremost, responding to the Speaker of the Assembly, the chair of the committee, and making sure that their needs are met. They have their answers there. At any given point, someone will reach out with questions within higher ed land, as I call it. And I'm oftentimes that first person of contact, and then being able to then share that information out with others that could also help in the research or whatever have you. Other times, making sure that I have my pulse on the policy trends as they're coming, lack of a better word for trends, but my pulse on what's on the horizon for higher ed, what are things that might need attention that members might not be aware of, helping to make sure members are aware of certain issues that they need to then put forth to their constituents so that they can be educated about those certain issues, are a variety of things that come within the role of what I do. And like I said, every day can be different, but that's what makes it rewarding.
So I'm curious, on average, since you mentioned you have a high, on average, how many bills are you looking at? Is it like 300, 100, 200? Like, is it a lot of bills? Is it that many bills?
I contend, yes, it's a lot of bills. Now, it's been amazing. I'm still excited. There was the early presents that came our way right before the holidays, where for the first time that since I've been here, instead of the bill limit going up for the amount of bills members can introduce per session, it went down. So
Wow.
for the last several sessions in the assembly, members were able to introduce upwards of 50 bills per session. In the Senate, it's been 40 as long as I've worked here. And so for the first time ever, that number has been reduced to 35 bills per session.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, definitely snapping that up, because I'm hoping within that will allow for even much more time to have thoughtful, robust conversations, and not in some cases where everything has to just go, go, go. But that being said, up until now, we have had upwards of hundreds 100 plus bills that are referred to the committee, over 200 actually this last session, hearing well over 100. And so on any given point during that very peak season of analyzing bills, on any given week, I'm looking at 10, 20 bills just on my own that I'm analyzing, as well as my colleagues analyzing a chunk of bills. But as I said earlier, making sure that I'm reading every single bill that comes through higher ed, because I need to be aware of at least the nuts and bolts before I then assign it out for a consultant to analyze and then take lead on. So lots of reading. I'm glad I have glasses because I still get tired.
I believe it.
Really rewarding though, super rewarding. And like I said, it evolves from time to time, and you just have to be ready to go with the flow. And I do appreciate that. It's never a dull moment.
Yeah, it sounds like it really keeps things interesting, lively, constant, like very dynamic role that you're in. So then I kind of want to go into kind of like how you started in the legislature. Was that like you wanted something dynamic? You wanted to go into the legislature because of that? What was that like for you?
I'm laughing. I appreciate that question so much. And I can't say that growing up in Southern California that I said growing up that when I grew up, I want to be a chief consultant at the state capitol. That was never a thing. And in fact, I thought at one point I wanted to do law. Then I thought I wanted to be a history professor. So my undergraduate degree is in history. And at the time, I thought I would do history pre-law. And then I realized midway I wanted to be a history professor. And that the plans definitely pivoted because I realized that I wanted to learn more just about policymaking in general. Fortunate to grow up in a household where civic engagement was encouraged. I remember even being little and having pajama feet pants and going with my parents to watch them vote and begging for a sticker. And I was like 3 or 4, but I remember those memories.
Love that.
Watching presidential debates well before I could vote and probably even spell presidential. And so I was fortunate to grow up in a household where giving, we saw the importance of giving. Parents were involved in so many different things with city council involvement and working on, being on advisory boards for mayors. And so it was just part of who I am. And so I realized my senior year in college that I wanted to be able to take a gap year. Didn't know about the fellowship program that exists within the Capital Fellowship Program. Yeah. But at the time, the legislature in the assembly had a quasi-competitive paid internship for college grads. So I found out about that just kind of by a fluke. And so on whim, I was like, you know what, let me apply for this and see what happens. So I got interviewed during the winter break and found out, I think I had 2 interviews, and then found out right before graduation that I got into the program. And I think there may have been about 15 of us total. And so that's how I started, as a paid intern right out of college, thinking I would do that for a year and then determine next steps. And that 1 year, my friend, has translated to being privileged to serve as an intern. I got hired as a secretary, continued to learn and grow, and then served as a legislative aide for a member, then a legislative director for a member, and all along trying to continue to just learn and grow, always having been passionate about pre-K higher ed education. And I'm fortunate enough to have been able to continue to develop a good depth and height, if you will, of policymaking, especially in that space. So much so that for a couple of years, I was not working for the legislature. I was government relations for the Department of Education and the former state superintendent of public instruction, where I really got to go into the trenches with K-12 and higher education policymaking, being a liaison for the Office of the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Department of Education, the State Board of Education, and then the legislature. And realized that was amazing, and then got recruited back to work in the committee, where I first started as the principal consultant of the same committee, and then now have been privileged to serve as the chief consultant. So long story short, that is a very, I think for me, unconditional path of how I've been able to learn and grow and serve in a variety of capacities, but the path that was meant for me.
That's beautiful. And I love that you kind of found your way into higher education, coming from college and moving into this realm. In terms of your path, in terms of into going from job to job, do you say that's pretty consistent in getting to the position you're in now, or does it vary from person to person, and there's no real set path to getting to your position?
That's a really great question. And I would say for any of the newly hired or newly transitioned legislative aides in the legislature or interns and assembly or Senate fellows, everyone's path and trajectory will be different. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
when you're continuing to learn, everyone is starting at a certain place of learning. But take advantage of all of those steps of learning because they will prepare you for additional opportunities. Like I said, I didn't seek out to one day say growing up, or even when I first started as hired as a legislative aide, I can't say at that point in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be a chief consultant.
Yeah.
I did eventually, after maybe my first year of being a leg aide, realize that I wanted to continue to learn and grow and then give
Mm-hmm.
back from what I had. I was fortunate to have amazing chiefs of staff and leg directors in my personal staff experience. And so I
Yeah.
did know at one point that I would want to be able to then be a legislative director to help give
Okay.
back, help
Yeah.
mentor leg aides that were newly hired, et cetera. And so it was in, I think, that pivot of going from leg aide to leg director and then having more exposure working with committees that I realized that at the heart, I wanted to really be able to hone in a lot more on policy making. And so, to
Mm.
your question, I think when people are able to have an experience of working in a personal office for a member and then continuing to learn more about policy issues, it really allows them an opportunity to be exposed and then eventually transition to committee life if that's
Yeah.
something that they want to do. However, that's not necessarily the norm because a lot of committee consultants already had a lot of policy expertise and they were
Mm.
hired coming from the outside where maybe they were working for a state agency or an advocacy firm. So there are several consultants that never were personal staff. They never
Mhm.
served as a legislative aide or a fellow or an intern, but that's okay too, because it goes back to what I said. Everyone's path and journey might be different, but as long as you're moving towards the goals that you have in place, it really does make a difference. But I think for me, being able to have had that experience working as a personal staffer, serving as a leg aide, as a legislative director,
Mhm.
really afforded me an opportunity to grow in that capacity so that now
Mm.
as serving as a committee consultant, when I'm working with staffers and they're calling and they're asking questions, I think I might sometimes have a little bit more empathy in what they're going through
Mm.
because I also went through that. And
Yeah,
it's
of
not
course.
uncommon. I'll say I'm taking off my consultant hat. If I was your legislative director, I would maybe advise you that you might want to think about doing this or that. Or if I was
Sure.
in your shoes, I think you might want to think about it from this perspective. And what I have found is
Mm.
by doing it that way, oftentimes many staffers have a better appreciation of what it is the committee consultants are doing. And I think it also helps them as they're on their journey of learning and growth as they're managing bills, maybe in many cases for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. It actually resonates with me too personally in my own role here at the library as a librarian. It's like everything kind of goes somewhere. I think in your roles, the learning you're having, it all goes somewhere. It might lead to the next job or even you being better at your current role, right? I think that's wonderful. Okay, so I want to switch it back over to your committee, the Committee on Higher Education, a little bit because I'm really fascinated about the committee you're in. I love higher education. Um,
Me
I
too.
I yeah, clearly, right? Uh, uh, so I'm curious if there's any topics you have seen over the years that have been more evergreen, that have come back year after year, or maybe there's a topic that is close and dear to your heart in particular that you've kind of worked on.
Absolutely. I will start from the latter part of that question and then go forward.
Yeah.
I would say that in the higher ed land, there are upwards of 30 plus different policy issues within, the big subject of higher ed. And because I've been able to serve in two capacities and have now been on the committee for several years, I've been able to have a touch point and research and go in depth with many of those issue areas. But one, if I could only pick one that I would say is nearest and dearest to my heart
Mm.
that I've worked on for several years would be financial aid reform.
Oh.
And I applaud our state because California, not only does it have the largest higher education system or systems, if you will, in the
Hmm.
nation, arguably the world, with a situation of the publics, 2 year, 4 year, all the independent institutions of higher learning and all the for profits. But we also have the most robust financial aid system in the nation.
Mm.
And that is where more students than other states are able to be awarded state financial aid, as well as other grant awards that the state is providing for people who are looking to, grow in their education.
Totally.
However, even with that great program with the Cal Grant, so many students who, for whatever reason, otherwise would have been qualified, maybe there's one thing that removed them, that they need the same amount of money, but something is missing that is no fault of their own per se. For example, maybe they were out of high school for 4 years, 5 years, and then they realize, you know what? I've been great being an HVAC technician, but I realize now that there's so much chemistry involved in how I'm repairing air conditioning units. I want to go back to school and become a chemist. Well, because they were out of school for that amount of time, they are not eligible for certain parts of financial aid, even though they would have needs. And so some of the reform that I've been working on for years is to streamline and modernize Cal Grant so that even more students can benefit from state financial aid, and really looking at how can we go from just maybe the tuition assistance that you get from Cal Grant now to total cost of attendance. And it's taken a journey. We're on year 7. I say we, I have a few amazing colleagues in the legislature that we've been partnering with this together. Ironically, all the members that started this with us are no longer here. So in this new session, it's almost like we're starting from scratch, but we're determined to see it through to the extent we can. So much of the reform is now codified, but we don't have the funding just yet. But financial aid is definitely, if I could only pick one, and there were several, if I could pick several, I would have several, but I would say top right off the gate would be financial aid reform. But in terms of other issue areas, to the first part of your question, that I think continue to, I don't want to say revolving door in a negative way, but a revolving door shows the significance that people are really paying attention to higher ed, and they want to be able to be thoughtful in their change and how policies are structured. So even from a big scale, where a lot of people are still trying to focus on accessibility, affordability, those are two things that people are looking at. Equity, are students all having a fair, equal chance once they get into a college? Are they being afforded all of the necessary tools that they need? We have a growing percentage of first-gen students where they made it, they did it, but they don't have anyone at home or in their sphere of influence to necessarily help them be navigated through. So there have been many attempts where we have, these one-stop shops, if you will, so that not that you're hand-holding, but that for someone who doesn't know what they don't know until they experience it, they have someone they can turn to on campus to kind of help them navigate something they've never been exposed to before. But basic needs has also been something that continues to come back. The cost of living in the state is just ridiculous, and students have so much need. And even if they have financial aid, that right now only covers their tuition. But what about their food and their books, their transportation? So that's something that consistently comes back in this space of meeting the needs of students, making sure they are aware of what the total cost of attendance is and not just the tuition and fees part of their earning and education. Another one is just dealing with students and within the realm, sadly, of when they're assaulted on campus, and what does that look like? What are the protections that they have? So Title IX has been something that in the last few years, this committee has really tried to tackle so that students can be protected, even faculty and staff. Anyone who steps foot on a campus can know that they're protected. And sadly, if something heinous does happen to them, they have resources in place and they know that they're available for them. And so slowly but assuredly, some of those things are changing. This past session, this committee had a full report that was done on Title IX and a bill package of 12 bills to try to really put a dent into this and have protections in place for students, faculty, staff, etc. And of the 12 bills, 11 got signed into law. And so we were really happy to see that. So that was not shy of a lot of work, but it was an amazing feat to see that happen. Another issue is also dual enrollment. So, with dual enrollment, students that are in high school can also take some courses on the collegiate side. And the whole point is then when they graduate from high school, conceivably to have X number of collegiate credits, and or in some cases graduate with their high school diploma and a 2-year degree. Well, what we were finding years ago was that it was really only affluent students that were benefiting from being dually enrolled, and not students that arguably really might need that additional touch point and that exposure to college. So several years ago, there was legislation that tried to expand dual enrollment so that all students, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of socioeconomic status, could also have an opportunity to be dual enrolled and then earn these credits. And so within that, we have found that more students are participating and more students are reaping those benefits, because again, in the long run, that will help decrease their time to degree and also decrease the expenses that they're going to have. There's still things that need to be massaged and how their articulation agreements, and I don't need to go into all of like the weeds on this, but that's something that I would imagine we will see again, because there's still things that need to be tweaked so that more students can benefit and they're aware that they have this option. And I could go on and on. I'll end with this one. Another big one is transfer. So like I said, California is home to the most robust higher education network, if you will, between the community colleges, California State University system, University of California system, the independent institutions, Stanford, Pepperdine, University of the Pacific, those that are independent, and then all of the for-profits like University of Phoenix, et cetera. Sure. And so what was happening, students who started their collegiate experience in a community college not that long ago, just a little bit more than 10 years ago, they just kind of got stuck at the community colleges. And what was happening is even within 6 years being at a community college, which really is supposed to be a 2-year program, after 6 years, the percentage of students who had earned a 2-year degree or had been able to successfully transfer to a CSU, UC, or independent was not even in the 30% range. And if they were students who were students of color and underrepresented students, foster youth, et cetera, like in that demographic, it in some cases was not even double digits, like talking 7 to 9%. Wow. And that was a problem. So there was epic legislation that was enacted to create something called the Associate's Degree for Transfer. And long story short, that ADT was in place so that schools within the community colleges, and particularly with the CSU system, California State University, they could communicate together, articulate all of these different majors. And so if you started at a community college, you would take 2 years, articulate, and have an associate's degree for transfer in English, and then get accepted to a CSU guaranteed to then do your next 2 years and finish in 4. But what we found in just last couple of years was that in all of that great work, so many students still were not aware of the associate's degree for transfer, and the transfer process was still very layered and challenging. So in the last few years, there's an additional legislation to make some clarifications and to continue to try to streamline that transfer process and reduce some of those additional barriers and confusion, if you will. And the work is not done. So I would imagine transfer would be another one that we will continue to see along the way, because we want students to be successful, but they need to make sure that they have the tools there so that they can be when they start and transfer and can get through and not have so much confusion.
That is like, honestly, my mind is kind of blown right now a little bit by
it's a lot.
And also in part, like how much you and your colleagues have to care, like personally care about all these issues, to get into the nitty gritty, to get into the weeds of all these things, and making sure that you're doing your due diligence, doing your research, making sure that people are taken care of who are going through the higher education system, right? Like I was in community college myself. I went to the community college system. I love community colleges and the whole transfer process, right? And like, it's hard. If you don't know what you're doing, me and my sister were first generation. She went to college before me. I followed in her footsteps, but our parents didn't go to college, right? They didn't have an idea of how to navigate this. And my sister tried to help, lead me and in her own way, but sometimes it's blind leading the blind, right? Because she's learning as she goes. So, this kind of work you're doing makes a difference for people, right? And not to toot your horn too much, I'm just personally like blown away by how much work you all are doing over there.
I appreciate that. And I will say, this is in my own way, I'll say a shameless plug. A lot of that work, a lot of that research would not be as possible without the partnership with the CRB, right? Because I know we rely so heavily on being able to talk to you and your experts who can really dive deep in some of these research questions that you're not just going to find anywhere. And so
Mm,
I would say, again, for new staffers, mid-level staffers, senior staffers, don't lose sight of the great, amazing network of knowledge, expertise that we have with the CRB, California Research Bureau. It's phenomenal. It will help make your life easier. And with the stresses that come naturally with any role that you have working for the legislature, when you have opportunities to reduce that stress that you have control of, use them. So shameless
thank
plug,
you.
if
I
you know,
appreciate
please,
you.
it's,
We
I'm
try our
not trying to
best.
be,
Yeah,
I'm just speaking the truth.
thank
So
you.
it helps us when we know that we have a, a reliable, nonpartisan, amazing think tank of people such as yourself and your colleagues that help with some of this research, because it is a lot and we do care, and we do go hard, because if we don't get to be able to scrutinize the policy, then what will happen is things will just keep going out, and getting chaptered and all of that. And then all these unintended consequences could pop up. So when the research is there, that helps us really to be able to make informed decisions so that the members can make the ultimate informed decision. So thank you for what you do.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Jeanice. That means a lot. And we love what we do. We do. We do love the research. And since we are talking about research, I'm curious. So what is like your research process like? So when something lands on your desk, what is kind of like your first thought process as you're gonna go through a bill or gonna start your research process?
Sure, that is a great question. I tend to read. I mean, I love reading, and I think it's definitely part of the role as being a consultant. But when a bill comes across, I'm definitely, and then once I talked about the process of how I assign bills out. So in the example of that, it's a bill I assigned to myself to then be the lead to do the analysis. I'm reading the bill multiple times just to
Mm,
make sure that I'm understanding what the intent and the goals are in the bill. And the next step is that as I'm the first couple of times, I'm just reading to read. Then I'll start writing questions if I don't think I'm understanding the direction of content of the bill. Then I'll even start asking questions, writing it on the bill. Okay, what people need to understand what this is, even if it's something that's already current law. But if people aren't aware of whatever it is they're trying to amend in current law, I will write down, okay, where do I need to go to make sure that they can have an understanding of whatever that is. And
mhm,
then I'll start listing different entities that I think would be able to be a go-to source to give me some of that information as I'm researching. Or if it's an issue that I have no idea, I've never worked on it before, then I'm really starting from ground one or ground zero, if you will. Last
mhm,
session, I had a bill that came through this committee that I assigned to myself. I had never touched any of the issues that it was pertaining to. And
okay.
so oftentimes if it's going to, excuse me, specifically target maybe a community college or a CSU or any particular segment, oftentimes that might be my first stopping point for research to say, okay, this bill is going to impact you. Who on your team is the expert in whatever the
Mm,
issue is? And so sometimes I'll go straight to a source that's a person that every day they're working on this particular issue.
mhm,
So I gave the
mhm,
issue of the example of financial aid. I'm
sure.
constantly in communication with the California Student Aid Commission because they are the experts putting out financial aid and whatnot. And so in some cases, it's a matter of just going to the people who are doing it every day. In other cases, like this one bill that I never dealt with this topic before, I have to go deeper into the trenches, and look to do research as to what is this? What does this look like? And then again, sometimes if there's ample time, then I know I can also flag it and ask CRB to be able to help
Mhm,
me with some, scholarly peer-reviewed articles that really
mhm,
get to the heart of whatever the issue is.
sure.
And, sometimes it's just a matter of compiling a list of entities that I know can be very helpful in that regard. So I don't really have one set way of how I research. I think it depends
Yeah.
on what the bill entails, but I constantly make sure I have that list of go-to entities that can be a starting point, because eventually, whether they know or not, between all of us, we'll know somebody that will know that answer that's, with data and proven that is helpful, because Wikipedia is not going to cut it. That's not
Mhm,
that's not going to do it. And I think sadly, oftentimes when people are first starting, they
mhm,
think that that's where they can go for information. But Wikipedia is not a trusted source because it constantly can change, and it's a person's bias that can just edit something out, and we
totally.
don't know if it's true or not. So we need like true data that can help opine the direction of policymaking.
I think that makes a huge difference. It sounds like, you go to the source, right? Where's the source material exactly at? Peer-reviewed articles, which makes a huge difference in your research. You have academics who are studying this and looking at different angles and when they're writing this paper, and then it's reviewed by other experts, so it's vetted,
Yes,
right? And I think that vetting
absolutely.
process is huge, especially nowadays, right? You don't know, you have to check for bias. You also have to make sure that it's credible, right? All of that makes a
Yes,
difference.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I totally get you. We've kind of touched on this a little bit, but new legislative staff or interns and fellows who are in the legislature. I'm curious, maybe in part this research question, right? Of what advice you might have when they start doing research, but also in general, if you have any advice or tips for someone who might just be starting in the legislature.
Sure, that's a great question. And I would just say, don't for them not to hesitate to even ask a question, right? And I know that
Mm,
sounds basic, but
mhm,
oftentimes it can be kind of scary and intimidating, and you don't necessarily know who you can turn to. But I would
mhm.
say in that case, specifically to new staff, new interns, new assembly or Senate fellows, utilize what you have around you. You can start even within your own office. Ask your legislative
Mm,
director or your chief of staff, where do you think I should look to for this research? And they may not know necessarily because maybe that's not their policy issue area, but you're starting the conversation with someone that I would assume you trust. Then you really, any situation should take advantage, full advantage of the committee consultants. No, we will never know everything. But
mhm.
because we've been in our roles for a longer period of time, we are considered the ones that have the expertise in any various issue. We may not know, but then we'll know probably way more readily than someone newer in their career of where to
Totally.
turn to get that answer. So it's never too early to even talk to a committee consultant, pick their brains about, well, what do you think? Where do you think I should go? And collectively helping them to brainstorm on what that research path could look like. And sometimes it's literally just a matter of talking to the committee consultant who already has that information that can help answer the question, and then they're done. Literally earlier today, I had a phone call from a staffer. We had been emailing back and forth on some things and wanted some clarity, and I was able to just whittle off what they needed, and that was the research that they needed. It wasn't like they needed to go and put in a formal request anywhere or have to run some huge data set. It was just something as simple as what it was. And so that
Yeah.
can be helpful too. Like staff can utilize the consultants as part of that research.
That's huge. Having someone to go to, having someone to ask questions about. And you're right. It can be scary. It can be intimidating, right? Because you don't
Yes,
want to be wrong or look like you don't know something, but you don't know until you ask, right? It's like,
exactly.
no, I get you. I get you. That's huge. I'm also curious. So, if someone's starting out, have you seen in general challenges that most people go through when they first start in the legislature? And maybe you have some advice about how to kind of get through that initial challenge, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question so much. And yes, I think challenges can come way, especially if someone is recently out of college or even sometimes recently out of grad school and just earned their master's degree, but not having had the capital working experience just yet. And so writing is
Oh,
one that I
okay.
think you come in thinking, oh, I just got my master's degree in this,
Yeah.
or I got my undergraduate degree in this. And
Hmm.
writing on the collegiate level or master's degree level is
Hmm.
completely different for the legislature.
Mm.
And I know even for myself, it was challenging. I have an undergraduate degree in history. So I
Yeah.
was taught where you're very, I don't want to say wordy for lack of not being straightforward, but
Sure.
I wasn't taught to be a parsimonious writer, if you will. It was
Mm.
like flowery and
Hmm.
all these other things
Yeah,
painting the
for
rich
sure.
story of whatever the history is.
Yeah.
And then for me, then when I went to grad school to earn my master's degree in political science, that was very interesting because the writing style was very different than history versus political science. But then you fast forward, I was already working in the building when I went back to get my master's degree. And so I already knew the structure of what is needed. Members and even staff, they're not going to read a 30-page paper. They're not going to read a
Mm.
10-page memo. So the writing structure is very different when you're first coming in from what you did in college and grad school to here. You have to be able to take the point and synthesize it so much so that a kindergartner can
Mm.
understand it. and it's on one paper and maybe 4 bullet
Got
points
you. Got
because
you.
the members don't have a lot of time. And so it takes a minute to be able to change what you've known as your writing style to what the members and or the chiefs of staff, whomever, actually need. And so I think
Mm,
it can get you improve by just doing it. So I know for me,
got
what
it.
I would
Okay.
do was just keep writing different, maybe fact sheets as I was working on bills, asking my ledge directors and others who I trusted who would give me critical but necessary feedback so I could continue to be the best version of what it was. So the member can be the best of what he needed at that time when I was my first year as a ledge aide. And then as I continue
Yeah.
to do it more, it improved. So don't be afraid again to ask those questions, get that feedback, and then not take it personally because
Mm,
this place is full of, it can be a lot of stress. And if you
mm-hmm.
wear your feelings on your sleeve and someone gives you constructive criticism on something, it can sting, but it's not personal. It's so that you can learn and grow. So I think being able to adapt to a writing structure that is necessary here in the legislature, not taking personal constructive criticism
Mm,
personally, or that it's an
yeah.
attack on you, is another thing that can sometimes be hard, I think, for new staffers
Yeah.
because they may not have had that same type of critique before. It's
Mm-hmm.
different than when you're getting a paperback from a professor and you might see some red ink or something. But
Right.
the way that some members will criticize it, it may not be fancy for everybody, but do their best not to take it personally. I think
Totally.
another one is being able to just keep people need to be able to keep organized and be detailed in what's happening. Because as I mentioned earlier,
Mm,
it's such a place of constant movement and everything is deadline driven. And so if a person, especially coming in brand new, where maybe they're not used to working from 9 to whenever, it
yeah.
can be challenging, but you have to make sure everything that is coming your way is important and
Mm,
being able to keep organized to know when you're completing the tasks that are before you and meeting the different deadlines. And so if you're used to kind of, finishing up senior year and you had 2 classes and that was it, you may not have had to be so detailed and organized to that extent that you would now working here in the legislature. So I think that would be maybe three off the top of my mind that I would hope would be helpful for newer staff.
that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's going to be really key to helping new staff, interns, fellows kind of have a little bit of a step ahead of the curve, so to speak, and I'm going to ask, are those things that might help someone like who's an intern or a fellow get hired maybe, or have an easier way to get hired? Do you have any suggestions in other ways maybe fellows or interns can get noticed when they're like going through their program?
That's a great question. And yes, I would say, especially for interns and fellows who are placed in offices where the member is serving on a committee and they are able to go to those committee briefings. That is a wonderful opportunity that when they are then able to come to a committee briefing, that they can come and be engaged. They can
Mm,
ask questions. They can stay back after the briefing to introduce themselves to the consultants and
mm,
whomever else is in the room. But by being engaged, even in those committee briefings for staff, they are putting themselves on blast in a positive way, if you will, because
yeah, yeah,
you'd be
yeah.
surprised. We will conduct committee briefings, and this is when we're having the series of policy hearings. And so, before every policy hearing, the committee will conduct a staffers briefing so that we can one by one for all the bills that are on the agenda for that hearing, be able to break down what it all entails, give recommendations and answer any questions that staff have so that when they go back and brief their bosses before the hearing, then the members have what they need and they are very much aware of then what the chair's recommendations are for voting, amendments, etc. And so you'd be surprised though and they have the analyses before the briefing, but you'd be surprised how
Mm,
many times that staff come and they're not prepared, they don't ask questions, and they're not engaged. Then we don't even know what's being relayed to the member of the committee that particular staff works for. So when an intern or a fellow, a new ledge aide is coming and they're prepared, they're asking questions, we're seeing that. And there is kind of, a situation where consultants will talk and we'll
yeah.
say, oh my goodness, have you worked with so and so? They're so good. I hope we get to work with them
Wow.
on more bills. But
Wow.
conversely, we could also talk and we're like, oh goodness, so and so is staffing this bill again. We really don't want to have to deal with them again
Yeah.
because they don't
Yeah.
they don't they're not engaged. So I think
Totally.
even just from that,
Totally.
being engaged, asking questions makes a difference that helps them start shining early on when some are just not engaged in that way.
Totally. And I think it goes back to maybe something earlier said, but when you care, people notice.
Yes.
People take note. They see that in you, you know? I think that's huge. Um, so I have another question for you, and it's one I personally like. It's one of those things where if you look back at your younger self, you know, and your younger self is just starting in legislature, and you had to talk to your younger self, would there be any advice, words of wisdom, thoughts you might share with yourself from back then?
Absolutely. One of the things I would share would be to give myself grace. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is I am, I think, most critical of myself. And I'm the type that if I
Mm.
know I'm doing something, I was raised and to this day, you give your all and you go all in to make sure that you're doing the best you possibly can, given the circumstances that you
Mhm.
have, so that you can do the best you can. And sometimes because of that, you can feel, or I can feel, where there's just so much happening where I'm like, well, did I meet my own
Mhm.
benchmark? And I know I've
Yeah.
set a very high standard for myself. And I think sometimes it can be daunting. And then the minute I feel that I didn't necessarily reach that goal, it
Mhm.
can be a lot. And
Yeah.
so I say that I would tell my younger self, give myself that grace, be okay knowing that every step of the way mistakes are going to happen, and that's okay, but you own them and you look at them as teachable experiences so that you can learn and grow from that teachable moment, and you're that much more strong to be able to then grow from it and then give
Mm.
back so that somebody else may not then repeat that mistake that you made. And we're human, so it does happen.
Yeah,
I
totally.
think as young staff, we oftentimes there's this feel like, oh my goodness, it has to be perfect, and what did I
Mm.
just do? And I don't know what to do. But then you're maybe afraid to admit that happened. And
Mhm.
so being transparent and knowing that it's okay, having that network of people around you that you trust that can help you
Mhm.
navigate some of those mistakes and grow, and then give yourself grace again, because that's going to happen. So that's what I told my younger self, because not that I mean,
Mm.
again, not trying to be, snotty or snooty,
Sure.
not that
Yeah.
I'm one that really makes a lot of mistakes that I'm aware of, but especially
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time, you want to be aware that it does happen. And then
Yeah.
what do you do when that happens, right? And then still, because I know I can be hard on myself,
Mhm.
realizing that when I first started, I think I was even more hard on myself because I just wanted everything to just like be perfect because it was all brand new. And I wanted to have that goal of growth in the legislature, but take a step back, breathe, digest, regroup, and keep moving forward.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's gonna to wrap us up. That's the way to end on a super lovely note. Um, can you tell us how people can reach out to you, legislative staff can reach out to you, or what maybe your committee's working on now, perhaps, before we sign off?
Sure. I always like to tell people, don't be a stranger. I'm here to be of help because I know what it's like to be brand new and maybe not necessarily have people that you can turn to. And it took me a while to be able to find a network of strong mentors who are still mentors to this day.
Mm.
And I'm thankful for that. And so there's nothing wrong with being able to have a mentor or mentors that you can turn to that can help you walk through certain things that you can bounce ideas off of. And so I've been privileged to be able to have that and now be able to say that I have a growing number of mentees where it's just an honor to be
Wow.
part of their journey. And so if you want to join that journey, then feel free to reach out to me. I'm in the Assembly Higher Education Committee. I'm in the drop down on Outlook. Last I knew, I'm the only person with the last name Warden, Warden.
Mm.
First, I mean, my name is there on the screen, so people know that Janice.Warden at asm.ca.gov. We're in the LOB room 173, and just really here to be a resource, because this journey is one that I think is unique. Not a lot of people, since California became a state in 1850, can say that they worked for the state legislature. And so I would say, don't just say you're here just to be here. What is the
Mm.
impact you want to leave? Because at any given point, whether someone is just starting or they've worked in the building for almost 20 years, like I have, you want to know that when you leave, you're leaving it that much better than when you inherited
Mm.
it. And not to sound cliche, but I truly believe that. So even on days when it gets like really ridiculous, it's super stressful, and I'm like,
Mhm.
why am I still here? I could be doing something else, making so much more money.
Yeah,
I
sure.
would literally leave the office and just go out and look at the top of the Capitol and realize, oh my goodness, it's bigger than me. It's an
Mhm.
institution for a reason. And I want to
Mhm.
make sure that as I'm part of the policy changes, making sure it's for the positive. And so no matter what a person's classification is, have that mindset of being the best they can be, as
Mhm.
well as be the best they can be for their member and for the constituents and for the state, so that positive change is made. Because there's so much rhetoric and so much,
Mhm.
darkness that's happening, but we can choose to be able to be part of the light that's here to help with solid policy making and open communication, working with both sides of the aisle, and being able to be the best that we can.
That's beautiful, Jeanice. I can't thank you enough for how amazing and wonderful this conversation has been. It has been such a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, my honor, and I'm so glad to again partner with you all. And I just thank you again for all of the work that you all do. I like to say definitely unsung heroes, because many of my analyses and my research is because of the great work from you and your team. So thank you. And just again, utilize CRB, people, because that will really make your lives that are stressful a little bit less stressful.